Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. We are here for the Diamond Tier sponsor speaker sessions that are going to be going on. And it really doesn't need an introduction here with my homeboy. We've got Adam Tim, who's the head of change management with Rapid Deploy, and he's going to be doing a session called Making the Most of Fast-Paced Change. Take it away, my friend.
Thanks so much, Ricardo. Great to be here. And thank you for joining me live for those who are here for the live show. I'd like to give some shout outs here. I see some familiar names. Mr. Duda, thanks for being here. Jared, thanks for being here. Lori, who else is here live? Hit up the chat window there. I will be monitoring chat as we go through the presentation. Halcyon, thank you so much. I'll be monitoring chat as we go through the presentation. So do not hesitate to blow me up in the chat window and ask questions live. If you've been in my live sessions at conference, you know that I like to have a conversation, and this virtual realm has been difficult to do exactly that. My fellow presenters, I'm sure you have seen that or felt the same way. So let's try to make this a conversation as much as we can. Also, Ricardo has assured me that if you ask questions in the Ask Questions window there, we will go over them at the end of the presentation. And I promise you, I will leave time to go through questions at the very end. So when it comes to the content of this conversation that we're about to have on making the most of fast-paced change, be thinking about the challenges that you currently face with regard to driving change initiatives, making change possible in your communications center, or it could be personal change as well, organizational, individual, team, whatever. Keep those burning questions at the top of your mind. We will talk about them at the end. Good morning, Wes. Great to see you. Cindy, Aaron, great to see you. Allison, Vicky, Erica, hi. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Awesome. Ray, good to see you. Brian, hello. So you have changes happening at your center. I guarantee it. There is not a communication center in this country that is not in the midst of changes, or let's call it at the tail end, if the pandemic is in fact ending, hopefully with the vaccinations and all. We are reaching the end of a chapter of abrupt and amazingly needed changes. And it's interesting to see how the pandemic has caused us as an industry, as the 911 industry, to make changes that we thought would happen someday in the future. There are centers that have chosen to use this time to take calls from home. Can you imagine before 2020 even saying, yeah, we could take calls from home? So we are in the midst of change. That's just one of these many changes that have happened. We're in the midst of it now, and it's not going to stop. My personal theory, is that what the pandemic has showed us as an industry is that we can change as quickly as necessary if we just do it. Now, there are ways of making most of fast-paced change. It can be unnerving, it can be challenging, and it can be difficult to know if the changes that you're making are making a difference, are successful, or if they are going to be successful. So this is the lead up. As we have this conversation today, I want you to be thinking about the areas of your operation, the areas of your team dynamics, the areas of culture, and these are all topics that are covered in depth by various presenters over the course of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So if you are facing changes at your center, or you are in charge, being in a leadership role of driving change and making it possible, be thinking about what you need to get out of change and how you can define success. Because I have some terrible news. I'm sorry, don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but a recent study found that 70% of change initiatives fail. 70%. Another study found that many change initiatives would have been successful had those in charge of making the change started sooner. So they got started too late. They dragged their feet. They procrastinated. They couldn't get the right parties in place or on board. And then when they finally started, failure because they waited too long. And another study found that most in charge of change initiatives would start. They would just get to it if they knew where to begin. Now, if you fall in any of those three categories, no problem. You get to make a decision. Today is a choice point. Because wouldn't it be cool if you knew where to start, if you knew which actions to prioritize, and you knew how to follow it successfully to the end? Wouldn't that be cool? Good to see you, Laurel. Thank you for being here. Hey, Gary. If you're thinking that would be really, really cool, then you are in the right place. Today, what I want you to get is the most important steps to take before starting your change initiative. I want to give you the pitfalls to avoid if you want your change initiative to succeed, and I want to give you some of the best practices that I've seen, that I've documented in conversations with PSAP managers, as supervisors, and line level dispatchers all across the country for creating buy-in, even with those most resistant to change. How does that sound? Sound okay? For those of you who don't know me, and there's several of you who do know me, thank you for being here. But if you don't know me, my name is Adam Tim. As Ricardo said, I am the head of change management for Rapid Deploy. But in my past life, I was a dispatcher for the LAPD for a little over 10 years. And I also ran a training in consulting and speaking company specifically for 911 dispatch centers and 911 dispatchers. And as I was running around the country, so I left the LAPD and was doing training classes on leadership and communication, conflict resolution, and resilience. I started hearing these stories. I started hearing these stories of centers that had gone from places where people didn't want to work to places that people loved to come to work, and centers where people would quit on a regular basis to transitioning to centers where when they open up for an application, they get 200 applicants. And I found that there are more and more of these stories in pockets all across the country. And I started to get really, really curious about what these leaders at these centers, what they did differently to drive these changes, to make these changes possible, when so many communication centers across the country are plagued by the same problems year after year after year after year. And I put all of these stories, I started collecting these stories. And over about 3 years, I collected enough stories that I put together my most recent book, which is called People Driven Leadership, How the Best 911 Centers Inspire Positive Change. And I found that in dozens of stories that many of the leaders were using similar principles, similar philosophies to make positive changes possible at their communication centers. And so I want to bring you some of those best practices today. I want to tell you a couple of stories out of this collection of stories as well. So here we are, a day in the life of the communication center. I'd like you to think about the changes that you're facing today, right now. What are the changes that are most pressing to you right now? And I'd like you to also consider whose responsibility is it to make these changes possible. And you might even say, you might have been guilty of saying, hopefully not today, but at some point in your dispatch career, it's not my job. You know, someone should really do something around here because it's above my pay grade. I just work here. what I found consistently at the best centers is that it is a community effort. And yes, it is easier to get things done when the top of the hierarchy is on board with the changes necessary and driving that change. It is a boost to morale when you see the higher ups working on the same playing field as you, following along the same philosophy. And we can even say that these are trappings of organizational culture. It is easier to work in a positive culture than something different. However, I've seen line level telecommunicators take initiative and start something and follow something to conclusion and make a difference in their center. If you've ever been to Halcyon Frank's sessions, she talks a lot about being the change that you want to see. And so maybe today is a choice point for you to just say, okay, I'm not going to keep waiting for someone else to do something. I'm going to do what I can today with the tools, resources, and the mindset that I have at my disposal. And that can be enough. In fact, there was one of the leaders that I interviewed for my book. He said, you know, everyone talks about someone should really do something. Someone should really make changes around here. And I always encourage my people to be that someone, to do whatever you can. Why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to make changes possible? Well, I love how this slide sums up the challenges we face. So you have this great idea, you have this great initiative, this great thing that you're working on at the communications center, and you know that if you can align all the powers that be and get the right people behind it, it will make a positive impact at your center. Great. You may have even started in earnest, brimming with hope and optimism, going in the direction of that goal. And you have likely met this winding, twisting path. And what this slide is saying here is that our current reality, where things are today, is separated from the goal that you see by this winding, twisting path represented, or that represents the behavior gap. It is not simply a gap of time and distance. It is a gap in behavior. That's the most difficult thing. How difficult is it to change your own behavior, even when you really, really want it? Even when you really know that making a difference in the way you eat and how much you exercise and whatever could bring more happiness and joy to your life. It's almost impossible if you've ever been there. I know I have. And so then you think of that from an organizational perspective. And the best analogy that I can give you when you think about why organizational change initiatives are so difficult is to take an individual, take yourself, you're one person, and it's so hard to change. An organization is a collection of a bunch of different individuals who all need to change in some way their behavior to get to where we're all going, to get to where we're getting. And that's not all. The organization itself has a personality, has a way of thinking, has norms, has ways of interacting. That is organizational culture. The behavior that you see in your organization is your organization's culture. And if the trappings of your organizational culture are preventing you from achieving success in your change initiative, guess what you have to attack or massage or work with? You can use any language that works for you. You have to work with the behaviors, the mindsets that are holding you in the current reality. How? Well, change is so difficult because we have to work with that past conditioning. Organizational culture takes a long time to form. It takes some time to back out of as well, but it can happen. I've seen it happen much more quickly than you might imagine. Change is also so difficult because there's continuous, constant competition. Think about how busy it is when it's hitting the fan in the communication center. Think about the early days of the pandemic, when your center was in lockdown, when no one could go in or out. I mean, I know many centers that are still in this state. What I'm saying here around continuous competition is there are so many things competing for your time and attention and dollars and resources. So then this great idea comes, we got to change. Even though it's going to pay positive dividends down the road, this change initiative is competing for time, attention, resources, and everything else that was already a challenge. How do you prioritize the most important in the midst of everything else that's going down? There's also underlying fears. There's underlying individual fears around change. There's underlying fears around what happens when we change organizationally. How many of you dread your next technological so-called innovation at your center? I don't know how many centers are just still working through the latest CAD install or CAD upgrade, the latest piece of technology that was brought in. And so we have this PTSD almost. We get burned by these old initiatives, and we have these underlying fears. We say, it's just better. I love that I'm following Mel's presentation. Mel's presentation is Who Took My Flip Phone? Talking about how we love our old technology because it's comfortable, it's familiar, it gets the job done. Now, your flip phone can still place calls. You can be very, very focused. However, what we're finding in our industry, what we're finding in the communication center, is that the old ways aren't working. Old ways don't work anymore. To truly usher in the promise of Next Gen 911, we need another approach. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about what the best 911 centers have done. And I'm going to go even further up. I want to share a story with you of a statewide 911 board that oversees over 100 PSAPs across the state. This state 911 board procured some of the latest technology and Next Gen 911 technology that they were going to then roll out across over 100 PSAPs. And past experience showed the board members that if they didn't do it right, they would not realize the ROA of their technological investment. Said in another way, that sounds like a lot of business jargon. Said in another way, it would be a waste of money if they didn't bring this change initiative to the PSAPs across the state in the right way. So I want to hit pause for a moment. I'm talking about a statewide initiative right now, but the principles that we're going to walk through work for a specific PSAP. They work for a specific team. They work for attacking culture and cultural artifacts that are holding you back. They even work in a similar way to personal change, individual change. So it doesn't matter if you're not on a statewide 911 board. It doesn't matter if you're not a supervisor. I want you to think about how you can apply these principles for positive change initiatives, driving positive change initiatives. So back to the story. the 911 board had experience of bungled change initiatives. And they knew that with this latest procurement, that they wanted to do it right, that they needed to do it right. And so the first thing that you need for things to go right is a vision. So this is one thing that I've seen separates all of the successful change initiatives from the not so successful change initiatives, is a very clear and concise vision of where we're going. Stephen Covey, I'm sure you've heard of his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, calls this beginning with the end in mind. If you do not have a vision for what success looks like, how can you possibly get there? So what's your vision? What's your vision for success if things were to go right? Now, one of the pitfalls, I told you that I was not only going to share the secrets of the best change initiatives, but also highlight the pitfalls to avoid. Once you have a vision, you must actualize the potential of that vision by developing a clear plan from it. So it's not merely enough to have this vision. And it can be frustrating to have a vision, but not be able to do something with it. So you start with a vision, and then you avoid the pitfall of not developing a clear plan by sitting down and saying, what are the steps to get to where we need to go? So that's what the state 911 board did. It said, we need to be successful in rolling out this technological change across the state. And the way that we do that is, and they outline the very succinct steps. And I'm going to walk you through the steps that they took as the vision became clear. If you're taking notes today, I'd like you to scribble some things down right now. What is the vision for your change? What is the vision for the possible benefits produced by the change initiative that you're thinking about, that you're in the midst of, that you're helping lead, that you're dragging your feet on getting started? What is your vision? And now take it one step further. What are some of the steps that you can begin taking today? Oftentimes in my training classes, I'll have someone come to me on a break. And this is often in the personal development classes. They'll say, this class, this conversation that we're having today, it's the wake up sign that I've needed to change things, to really make a difference in my life. And I am leaving here, and I am going out to change everything. And that is a wonderful vision. It is a wonderful vision to reinvent yourself, to move boldly in the direction of positive change for you and your team and your organization. However, if your vision is huge, it can start to feel overwhelming if you don't also break that down into actionable chunks. So we kind of have to toe this line of a compelling and inspiring vision while also keeping one foot in reality. Because oftentimes, if we keep one foot too planted in reality, we don't let the vision guide us. So I'll leave it to you to craft a clear enough vision that you start to see the steps forward, but also keeping it compelling enough so it's not too much like the past, if that makes sense. Just a reminder, thank you, Ricardo, for popping that in the window. Please put some questions in the ask a question field if you have a specific change initiative that you're dealing with. If you have specific questions about what you're working through, please put a question in the window and we will address it as we go through. Now, the importance of a vision cannot be understated, and nor what happens when you have a clear and compelling vision. From your clear and compelling vision, you can then begin to see the purpose. And I would encourage you to start with the purpose as well and have all of these purpose, mission, and values be interwoven as the fabric and the foundation for your change initiative. Said it another way. If you don't know where you're going, how can you possibly get there? And if you haven't decided ahead of time the values that are most important to allowing you to achieve this mission and vision, it's very easy to get dissuaded. It's very easy to be taken off a minor tributary. If you think about the path and the direction of your change initiative as being something that's clear enough to see that as you get into the weeds, as you get into the forest, you can still discern the path that you're clearing, that along that journey, there are going to be good ideas that come up that might threaten to derail your change initiative if you place too much importance on something that's not aligned with the mission or values. So, and you might be thinking like, yeah. I get it. Vision, mission, this high, lofty stuff. Can we get into the real nitty gritty? The reason I'm spending a lot of time on vision, purpose, mission, values, these big ideas, is because not enough change initiatives are led with this in mind. The vision, the purpose, the initial purpose, which offers this thing to call back to when things get difficult, when things get hairy. You need to do this upfront work because it's going to get tough. It can't not get difficult at some point down the road. The State 911 Board, they began with the vision of think like dispatcher. This was their motto. We are going to think like a dispatcher, and we're going to allow this motto, this principle, to guide our efforts in rolling out this change initiative. You don't have to have a pithy saying, but something that's memorable certainly helps. So once you have this vision, once you've developed a plan, once you've avoided the pitfall of not developing a clear plan around it, then you got to communicate it. You have to avoid pitfall number 2, which is not communicating your vision, not communicating the plan forward. And you might say, well, I've told a few people, is it enough? Is it enough to align all the powers that be, all the resources that surround you, align them with the change that's unfolding? So I'd like you to give yourself a rating. Now, how are you communicating when it comes to this change initiative? How good are you at it? Are you giving yourself a thumbs up or a thumbs down or somewhere in between? How clear is your communication? You might be saying, like, how do I quantify my communication or the success of my communication? Clarity, what people do with it. How good are you at clearly communicating where we're going, where things are? It's important to think about that. It's important to consider the clarity of your communication because when it comes to new changes, there are going to be roles and responsibilities assigned. And you have to decide who's going to do what. Roles and responsibilities, it's all about who's going to do what. As John Gordon said in his wonderful book on organizational change, the energy bus. He said that your job as a leader is to get the right people on the bus in the right seats going the right direction. And how are you going to do that without being able to clearly communicate? Now, I'm not going to talk about communication too much, except say that it's important. There are sessions during this conference and sessions that have already occurred that talk about communication. Be constantly looking for ways to be a better communicator, to be more emotionally intelligent, to be more attuned to the folks around you. I cringe at how often I've heard, for being in communications, we sure don't communicate with each other very well. We need to stop that. Because from defining roles and responsibilities through your communication, we need to then communicate the expectations and goals to the various parties and teams involved with the change initiative. The State 911 Board, one thing that they did was they said, okay, we need to assign accountability here. So these roles and these responsibilities are assigned to this party and this party, because first of all, as a leader, you can't do it all yourself. You must get other people on board, and they have to know what they're working towards. The State 911 Board, they divided their state up into two halves to better facilitate communication, and they set in place clear and consistent timelines for when they communicated, how the communication was to take place, and they also knew that they had to start sooner and allow more time than they initially thought to make it successful. And so they avoided the next pitfall, which is not leaving enough time for your change initiative to succeed. In the case of the State 911 Board, they said, okay, we are launching in February. In order to launch in February, we need to begin communicating in earnest this change initiative in December. And guess what they had to do before December? They had to divide up the responsibilities. They had to carefully craft and communicate the expectations and goals. So you see, with the vision of success, you can then back things up and say, okay, this is the timeline. These are the benchmarks that we have to hit, the milestones, in order for this to be a success. Jared, I love this thought. Communication is who we are, not what we do. And you got to involve others. You have to involve others. You can't do it alone. Involving others is the solution. And taking one step at a time adds up to huge gains. So what's that step for you? What are the roles and responsibilities that you have to define? What are the expectations? What are the goals that you are working towards? And you might say, I haven't really thought of it. If you don't have any goals to strive for, it's very difficult to get other people on board, especially a group of high-flying, type A overachievers, which most in our profession identify as hard-driving overachievers. Can we agree on that? People want to get involved, but they don't necessarily know how to get involved. I'm reminded of a conversation that I had just recently with a manager at a large center, and she reached out to me because they are on kind of difficult ground. They feel like they're in this state where they just changed to 12-hour shifts. They did it as a result of staffing challenges that they're experiencing, and but they're doing it on the heels of a positive culture, high morale, and following along a lineage of success. They're what I would regard as a successful center because they have good morale, they have strong team camaraderie, they get their job done at a high degree of quality customer service. So all these are metrics for success that you can kind of measure yourself against. And she reached out because this manager who I was talking to, she reached out because she said, we've done a lot. I'm happy with where we've gone and what we're doing, but I feel like I want to involve more people. I want to involve more people in the change initiative because people are tired of hearing from me, and I can't be the only one saying this is where we go, this is where we're going. Come on, let's go, let's go, let's go, because people are tired of hearing from me. And if you identify with this statement, I get it. And the conversation turned towards how she can enroll more people in the change initiative. And I'll share with you the same thing that I shared with her. There are people waiting to be tapped to help your change initiative. I talk about the silent majority. The research on organizational development shows that there is a small percentage that are highly engaged. They're the folks who will always volunteer for things. They're folks who are constantly saying, hey, I can do it, I can do it. They're always raising their hand. That's a small percentage on this end of the spectrum. There's also a small percentage on the other end of the spectrum, what I call the toxic 10%, who are actively disengaged. They're dragging their feet and they're ho-humming, sitting in the back of the room going, and they say they pay lip service to things could really be better around here. Someone should really do something. But they would never volunteer. They will never get behind. In fact, they are actively working to sabotage at times the change initiative. So these are two ends of the spectrum. Those two ends of the spectrum represent 80 to 85 15 to 20% of your total population, of your team. That means there's 80% of your total population, who I call the silent majority, that they're not overly jazzed, they're not volunteering for everything, they're not actively sabotaging things, they're not actively disengaged, but it's okay around here. Just meh. It could be better. Your job, driving a change initiative, is to enroll the silent majority. Oftentimes, they want things to be better, but they don't know how to do it. They don't know what to do. Oftentimes, they've been steeped in negative culture for so long that they can't even see a vision for how it might be different. They don't know what the first step is. And in fact, they would love to be called to action, but they're not going to ask for that. So your job is enrolling those people. And Valerie, how do we change apathy to action? First of all, by having the courage to share your vision and to have conversations and to get out on the floor and to not stop. People will begin to understand that you mean what you say if you keep at it. Oftentimes, they're like, oh, look at that new supervisor go, brimming with hope and optimism. Ooh, they're just going to try to get things done until they run up against the inevitable shortcomings, the inevitable hardships that cause us to just say, who is I to imagine things could be different? I encourage you to fight the good fight because people are watching, especially in the early phases of a change initiative. People want to believe, but it takes time. It takes time to change that behavior. So find your change agents. Find the people who you can get on board. Find people who are good at things that are important to the change initiative and extend a personal invitation. And don't be surprised if at first they're like, well, let me think about it. Continue to enroll. Don't worry about being a pest. If your intentions are pure, if you are values driven, people will eventually get on board. Because I don't know any dispatcher, I don't know anyone in this profession who has said, you know what, today and for the rest of my career, I just want to hate going to work. I don't know anyone who would ever say that. In my consulting work in PSAPs that I did before joining Rapid Deploy, I've had that conversation with entire teams. Like, what do you think? What do you think's wrong with this place? Talking about the organizational culture and the things holding the center back. And where do you think we can go? What's possible if we moved in the direction of positive change? And so I'm inviting the team members that I'm sitting with to kind of tap into a vision of possibility. And then I ask, what's preventing you from being involved with this? And I've had the most disgruntled, crusty, tenured dispatcher say, you know, I never thought of that because I would like to see things better here. I would like to in fact, I would be a part of making things improve if someone came to me and asked me to be a part of it. Now you say, "Oh yeah, right. That those crusties, they'll say that, but they won't get on board." And to that, I will say, you have to meet them where they're at. Everyone has something that they believe in, and from a values-driven perspective, from high enough perspective, it is possible to make a connection. And then the momentum starts to build. Then things start to roll. And you're going to get feedback. You're going to get feedback about what people think as things start to change. Now, that 911 board, so they assigned roles and responsibilities. They divided up the responsibility. They divided the state into two halves. There was people who were clearly accountable for their part of communicating the change initiative. They were going out into the PSAPs, over 100 PSAPs. They began in December, communicating in earnest for a February launch. They had certain structures in place to get the message out. They had thought through all of these things in a very methodical way. And within a month of the new technology going live, over 90% of the PSAPs across the state had begun using the technology and getting benefit from the technology, saving lives, making a difference, providing better service in call taking, in dispatching. And that was the feedback that indicated to the 911 board that their efforts had proven successful. And they didn't stop. And what I would encourage you to do, even if you notch some early wins, some early successes in your change initiative. So you've solved the problem. Don't stop. Because nothing kills a new change initiative like petering out at the very end, thinking that you had already done enough work. What these change initiatives go through, the ones that falter at the very, very end, that have notched early gains, is depicted here on this slide. Now, this is from a wonderful book called Managing Transitions by William Bridges. William Bridges said that most change initiatives have a great vision, compelling vision, and were communicated just fine, had the right people in the right place, but they fizzled somewhere in this neutral zone. Because every new change marks the end of something in the past, as well as a new beginning. And if you don't continue to drive change, if you don't continue to communicate the benefits of the change and also lift up and show through clear illustration the benefits of the changes taking place, like the state 911 board, they were getting stories of how the new technology was making a difference out in the PSAPs, and they were feeding those stories back to the rest of the state, saying, look, it's making a difference. This is what we've been talking about for months now. And because they continued to do that, they were able to transition from the ending, the old way, traverse this neutral zone where most change initiatives die, and usher in this new beginning, which gained its own feeling of momentum and was able to stand on its own. So I'm curious, what's an action that you can take? What action can you take today in the direction of that needed change? You are already a superhero. How can you be a superhero for this change initiative? What's something that you can do? What's something that you can enlist others to do? You don't have to do it alone. And I'd like you to commit to that. I'd like you to commit to taking that next step. What is that next step for you that you can take today? And while you're taking these steps, while you're marching into the wilderness in the direction of much needed change, don't forget your why. Don't forget your purpose. I find that the leaders who really get things done, they're very rooted in their personal why, their purpose, their personal mission. I'm thinking of Simon Sinek right now, one of my favorite books, Start With Why. I'm thinking about my friend Melissa Alterio, who is so personally driven by her why, as she has made just amazing changes happen at her former center, and now she's at Cobb County 911 to see her legacy make a further impact. Actually, she's doing a presentation later on today around organizational culture. But I'm reminded of those who have made amazing things happen, and it started with their own personal vision. So what's that for you? What's the vision of the world that you're creating through your job, through your role, through any of the roles that you fulfill in your life? And don't forget to set up metrics for success. How will you measure success? And I've mentioned a few ways to measure success in the conversation thus far. You can quantify organizational culture. You can do an employee engagement survey. You can just management by walking around the floor, talking to people. You can, if you have a new piece of technology, a new application that you're using at your center, you can look at how many of your team members use it on a daily basis. You can get customer success stories for how the technology is making a difference in your teams and the public's lives. What are your metrics for success? Because if you don't have metrics for success, then eventually, even with a compelling vision, it's going to feel like you're just wandering around. So I'd love to turn now to we have a few minutes left, and I just love that. I intentionally tried to deliver less content in this presentation because I always feel like I'm running up against the very, very last minute and don't have enough time to take questions. So I intentionally kept the presentation a little bit short so that we can talk about very specific ways to actualize the information that we just covered. So if you felt compelled to re-engage some change initiative that you've abandoned, or to really get rooted in what needs to come for your current change initiative, I'd love to hear some thoughts here. Ricardo, did we get any questions in the question field?
So there was not any questions that came into to the question field here, but there were a lot of comments. I don't know if you are you able to see over into the comments and all?
I can, yes,
All
I
right,
can.
excellent. There are it was just a lot of good comments and everything going back and forth. And well, actually, a question did just come in here now. Do you? Oh, okay, hold on. Let me click on the start answering. So it says, do you have additional books you'd recommend on change management?
Oh my gosh, yes. So William Bridges' book, Managing Transitions, is a fantastic book on change management. I love all Simon Sinek's book. Start with Why is great. Also, Leaders Eat Last. So we talk about leadership, but also the mechanics for organizational change. The I'm blanking on anything by Patrick Lencioni is
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. He wrote his seminal classic and most popular book, or most widely known book, is called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. But I found that Patrick Lencioni has written extensively on culture and how to drive change initiatives, organizational change initiatives. So any of Patrick Lencioni's books, and his last name is spelled Lencioni.
There you go, everybody. These are excellent ones, man. I know that or I've noticed that whenever I attend a session of yours, or um, when we've spoken, that you pull out some books that I've not heard of before, but they're
Hmm.
very intriguing. Like they're awesome. So I love that you always have, you know, some new material, a lot of stuff that you're reading that, you know, that not only is you know, interesting to you, but that, you know, also helps with whatever it is that you're doing in life or work, but also for those who would be in the audience that would learn from it as
Hmm.
well. There's another one here that says, um, let's see, it just and maybe oh it's okay. It says, I love the ideas on how to get your team motivated, but how do I keep myself motivated? After 23
Uh,
years, it's getting harder and harder. That's a good
Absolutely.
question.
It's a great question. It's a great question. So um, I'll refer back to Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen, the seventh habit is sharpen the saw. So Stephen Covey pointed out, even way back when in the 80s, that you have to keep yourself fresh. You have to practice self-care. You have to take downtime. You have to take time for yourself. And it's interesting to think about self-care in the context of motivating your team. How can you possibly motivate a group of others if you yourself just aren't feeling it? You can only fake it for so long before it starts to cause a drag in the mission that you have set out to achieve personally. And so you got to take your weekends. You probably have to say no more often. You have to give back to yourself. And writing in a journal is a great way, like to take quiet time. You don't have to write in a journal if you don't like to, but it's really about cultivating time for yourself to just be still. When for those of you who remember my story of being angry Adam and going from being angry and disgruntled for the first 7 years of my dispatch career to traversing that negativity and turning into something else, a lot of it was done by sitting and just writing in my journal. I would have these old habits of snapping at people, callers, supervisors, coworkers, and I began to catch myself. Sometimes it was too late, like I had already been judge, jury, and executioner and told someone off. But that pause, I would then bust out my journal and then write. I was like, this happened. I was the not so nice person. And slowly I began to open up more awareness around the habits that were leading me to be the way that this is just the way I am. And I realized that I wasn't just the way I was the way that I was conditioned to be over years of bad habits. And journaling allows us to kind of highlight those bad habits and untangle from them. It also gives us time to just be still and at peace. And I find that many heroic caregivers, they have a habit of sacrificing themselves for the people around them, for the situations around them. I would say stop sacrificing yourself and prioritize you for the world that you're creating.
That's a good insight, and also knowing that sometimes it's hard to look at ourselves, right?
Yeah.
It's when you're writing in a journal, and you start reading things, especially when you make progress, right? And you go back and you read some entries and you think, damn, it was me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like a lot of that was me, but also, building on from, like you were saying, being conditioned after, for so many years and everything of things
Yeah.
that was going on. And,
Yeah.
for me, it's listening to music. Sometimes when I'm sitting in here and I'm working on something, I don't want to do anything. Like I don't want to
Yeah.
do anything. But then I throw on some good tunes and then I
Yeah.
wire in, and it's just going, just going.
Yeah. I
Love it.
love it. Me too. Other thing that made a huge difference, and but Mark, I wanna answer your question. You had a great question in the thread. But the other thing that I strongly recommend is finding a mentor, finding someone who you can talk to, finding a confidant. And I'm not talking about your BFF who you can just gripe about and vent and complain. That's different. It's important that you have someone, especially as you walk the sometimes very lonely leadership path, that you find someone to bounce things off, a sounding board, a confidant who has walked a similar path before, and who can remind you, hey, you're doing the right thing. You're on the right track. And Mark, that relates specifically to your comment. It can sometimes feel like you're the only one. You're the only one who has the vision of a healthier, better, more productive, more positive center. What do you do then? I can tell you confidently that you are not the only one. It just seems that way. And it does take courage to put yourself out there, especially when you think you're the only one and you're just going to get swatted by the crusties over in the corner. And they are not going away. They will, and you don't need them to go away. You don't need them to retire. You don't need them to quit. Just believe in what you believe and know that there are people waiting to be inspired by you.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for being on again and for Rapid Deploy being a sponsor. It's always awesome to have you. If you get a chance, jump into that Discord community. There's a lot of people in there that are chatting about the conference and everything, and you can
Excellent.
connect further, and all of you can connect further with Adam as well. So thank you very much, dude. I appreciate it. It is always a
Ricardo,
good time.
a joy. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining today.
Have a good one. We'll see you all
Thanks.
in the next group.